Yeah, some something that's always stuck with me is something that Mike Tyson said, and it's everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
So who punched you in the mouth?
Well, no, I think the takeaway there is how little control we have over, planning our careers, and something that I learned and that's been a theme for me is um, sort of have a vague idea, right, and be open to where life is taking you, and identify the flows that are going to carry you there, and I mean it's easy to start with, CA to counsel, right? But I mean our life starts before that, and you know many young lawyers and students that I meet, have this idea that I've had I've had a meticulously planned um, pathway to where I am now, and it's the furthest thing from the truth. So in high school, I wanted to be an artist. You know, I didn't have the choice to apply for fine arts. Coming from an Indian home, recently middle class. I mean, this year was yeah. I mean, I started school um, at the end of apartheid, and we transitioned into the new schooling system. At one point it was curriculum 2005. I mean, I went to 7 schools. you know um, you know Once the local schools were opened up, sorry, once we could move out of your local
Yeah.
Indian town
Yeah.
schools, we started going to Model C schools, and something that our parents carried, through the transition into democracy was, being conservative. So um, you weren't going to apply for fine arts, you weren't going to apply for design, so yeah, standard 9 came, matric came. I didn't know what to apply for. Law was my third choice. I didn't get accepted for 1 and 2. I fell into law, right? And university was difficult. I was a terrible student.
What makes a terrible student?
I think somebody that's disinterested, right? And someone that sort of doesn't have a firm grasp of what it took for you to be there. And I mean, we have the stereotypes of Indian people, wealthy and businessmen, but that is not always true, right?
Yeah,
So
and if you're either a doctor, a lawyer, or accountant, or a failure, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. So I scraped by, not to be a failure, but it was difficult, and transitioning from schools to university, it was difficult, and it took me some time until I eventually became interested, and it was it was late in my schooling career, and I I thought that I wanted to get into competition law. My undergrad is law and economics. That's my background. I thought I wanted to be the suit and tie power lawyer, competition law. And again, it's when I started learning about um, how little value, stringent plans are, because what did 21-year-old Jatheen know? Right? We have an idea. I'd never been in a law firm by then. I picked it up in one of our economics classes, and I decided, I like this. This is what I want to do, and it didn't work out, right? So, late in my schooling career, my peers were already applying for articles, getting the Denise rates and Weber Wenzel CA ships, and I thought, okay, how am I going to set myself apart? So after I had finished my BCom degree, I finished my LLB and did my articles at the same time, which was difficult because I was registered as a full-time student at tax. And, I was fortunate enough to find a small firm who, you know, would have needed me there most of the time, not all the time, And I mean, it worked out such that I graduated my LLB in April, and 2 months later, I got admitted as an attorney, and it was hard. The person I did my articles with was, a hard woman, and sort of trying to carve out a space for herself in a very male-dominated, white male-dominated Pretoria, right? So, I mean, how she compensated for, owning her space was to be big and demanding, and yeah, I mean, that's how I started articles. And I'll tell you a story about, my first appearance. I didn't have right of appearance because I didn't have a law degree. And I got to the office one day and yeah, I got to the office one day and, one of the associates threw a robe at me and said, you need to go to Pretoria Magistrates Court now, right? I didn't know. That was my instruction. I was given a file and I was sent to court. And I was before Magistrate Tritter. I think she's retired since then. And I didn't know what to do in court, because I was such a disinterested student.
Yeah.
I never paid attention to court etiquette. And so I dressed up like this. I had my gown over, my robe over, and I waited for everyone to finish speaking. And just as Magistrate Tritter was going to adjourn, I stood up with my quivering voice and I said, Your Worship, I was sent here, but I don't know what. I was just told to ask you this. And she had a rough day in court. And she unloaded her entire day on me. Right? And I was 20 at the time. And, I didn't know what to do because I was so unprepared. Either whether that's the associate's fault, or whether it's my fault, I don't know. But I was so disinterested that I didn't even know to attempt to prepare, right? Read through the file or something. And she unloaded on me, and the only option I had in my body was to break out into tears because it was so overwhelming, and this is 2:30 on a weekday, magistrate's court, and, she let me have it, but a theme that I want to talk about today is grace, right? Because I found, despite my shortcomings, I've always been shown grace, right? And how that interaction ended was her calling me to her chambers and, interrogating how is it that you found yourself in this position of being so unprepared, of not knowing what to do, and I told her exactly where I am. I told her I didn't have right of appearance. I told her all these things that I didn't know how to handle. And, she sent her registrar to make me a cup of tea. And she sat me down and she said, boy, what you need is guidance, right? What you need is someone to take their time with you to show you the ropes. And that's a theme that I found in my career. And it's from that moment onwards, it's looking for mentors. And in my career, generally mentors haven't been abundant, and I think early on in my career I was a bit bitter about that, and why is it that some people get the grooming and get the mentorship, they people heavily invest in their success, right? But not for me, and it must have been because I was so disinterested. People are easy to write off. But I've been shown grace, and something that I carry with me in my practice, and especially in my interactions, in teaching and working with the CAs, especially working in teams, in legal teams, is how can I be that senior that I always wanted, right? How can I be that mentor that I always wanted, that I thought I deserved, for people who may not have it, or maybe people already have it and they just need someone to show an interest in them. So yeah, I did my articles. I found an associate job for a few months and I hated it. I was working in a small firm in Capital Park, and eventually I left. I spent six months at home, And, I decided now's the time to get into the competition commission, and explore this interest that I had in competition law. So I went there to be a competition lawyer, but I came out an activist, and that's where I had my political awakening, because the competition commission is a state organ, and having worked in Capital Park for so many years, I'm suddenly surrounded by black people, and it's a pocket that you find yourself in Pretoria, especially in the north, where your peers are white Afrikaner men, and there might be one woman in the office, right? Now we're going into somewhere that's representative, right? Um, and getting close to these people who are now um, serious about what they're doing. They're very interested in it, and I learn from them. You learn about things that you sort of feel in your life. I mean, um, I have memories of being a small boy during the apartheid time, but not understanding what was happening. And it's now suddenly having context to that. So making sense of a lot of my experience, and it's like, okay, this is something that's visceral for me. And I think that's where I had my awakening to social justice, right, in sort of in the conscious sense, right? So it's now going from something that you feel is there to something being very front and center, right? So I mean, what I focused on at the competition commission was looking at public interest aspects of mergers.
Okay.
So how does that affect previously disadvantaged groups of people to become competitive? How does it affect labor? I started working um, with unions, and yeah, you become, to use the Pretoria word, you become wakker. You're awakened to it,
Yeah.
and yeah, then I thought it was time to join the bar. I think I had reached a ceiling at the commission, and I just decided to do it, and I did it. And it was difficult. It is difficult. But again, grace came my way. I have a long relationship with Lawyers for Human Rights, and someone there decided to give me a chance. With public interest work, and I'm good at it. It's something that comes naturally for me. I have an inherent navigation of issues, so that made it easy. And I think people saw that, and that's where um, I could redeem the uninterested student, to become the interested practitioner, and I think people saw that. And I fell into constitutional law. I fell into practice, public interest practice, and I do it. I love it, and it's important. And yeah, it's been 10 years of practice as counsel, 15 years altogether, and recently I've been focusing on teaching. And yeah, these are the types of things I like to impart on people who I'm teaching, people who I'm working with, and cultivating a culture of grace. How can we be more graceful with our colleagues? How can we be more graceful with, especially our juniors, right? Juniors in the team. How can we cut each other slack, right? Because when times become tough, um, you hope that people will cut you slack, and you see that if you are that way with people, people pick up on it and internalize it. So yeah. Yeah, so I mean, the competition practice at the bar is an open secret, right? So I mean, one would be warranted in thinking that if you spend time at the competition commission and now you come into practice, you're a prime candidate for getting that type of work. But these are people who have business interests. They're not concerned. When I say people, I mean people who the merging parties, right? Or people who are conducting businesses and are now being investigated by the commission. They want the best of the best, and in South Africa that means a white man from Joburg with the accent, wearing the suit, and one would think that being at the bar and getting work, is determined by merit, but it's not always the case. It's how you speak, it's how you dress. That's going to determine which silks are going to pull you in. And I mean, a lot of it comes down to that. So that's how you get yourself in a situation where you're looking at that case, and there was a photo taken after that, to say, look at all the women, but where are the young black council, right? Yeah. We find ourselves disinterested in work. Sometimes we find ourselves disinterested in the news, right? What's going on? For me, I think the disinterest came from not knowing what it is that I wanted, what it is that I wanted to do, whether I was good enough to do it, So something I'm very conscious of coming from an Indian home is sort of the work ethic of our fathers, right? So you have someone, so like my dad had a shop, right? It was a modest shop. He worked Mondays to Saturdays. Sundays he was out doing the buying for the stock, right? So that's 7 days that he's not available, right? So he would leave early, come back, supper time, and now as an adult I can relate to him and be like, I get it, you just want to chill, right? But you have a system that's placing pressure on you to be something. So like Zafra said, right? Lawyer, doctor, engineer, right? If not that, then there's this phantom concern for your ability to be a success in life, right? So that pressure is there, but who's going to show you how to do it, right? Who's going to be the role model, of teaching? Okay, this is what it's like to be interested in something. This is what it's like to cultivate an interest in it. So now being a father myself, I have a daughter who's almost going to be 4, right? And I've got the privilege of working from home most of the week. So that time is there to just start being interested in her and seeing what it is that you like and cultivating that, right? And it's that subtle cultivation. So I think where I found myself in university was, distracted with other things, disinterested in studying, disinterested in being studious. Because if you look at how it works, once there's an interest, that means you have to go to class. Once you go to class, you have to write the exams. Once you write the exams, you have to get your degree and start working, right? But I don't know what that looks like. So you put it off, right? And your interests lie elsewhere, So maybe that's the way to rationalize it now. But talking about the range, it's like, yes, I was there, and I can recognize myself when I am becoming disinterested in anything. And it's like, okay, how can I cope with that in a healthy way, right? How can I still be able to deliver work that meets my own expectations of myself, right? Because we experienced that whole range. So I don't think it was a waste. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it's hard to talk about that without going into personal beliefs, right? So, as a life philosophy, I like to follow Taoism, right? And the central tenet of Taoism is not forcing, so it's about identifying what is the flow of life, what is the flow of nature, right? And it's all very esoteric, right? So what does that mean, right? This is self-awareness, right? I think it's an archaic viewpoint to think that your work and your career is something different from life. So life happens when you get home. Your personhood happens when you get home, and you're something else at work, right? But that's not the case. You're the same person throughout the day, right? So how do we bring that we are into our work, right? And I mean, some people will talk about faith, some people will talk about religion, philosophy, whatever it is for you, right? And for me, it was falling into it, because when I joined the bar, my best skill was saying yes. Someone would phone me, and because I was so hungry to get any work, it's yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do this. Right. A skill I'm developing now is saying no. And it took me 10, 15 years to do that. So now it's the difficult thing to say, I'm not taking this. Or yeah, that this brings my self-awareness to where I am, right? And I think what we need to avoid is slipping into an unconscious state and just roboticizing this work thing, and it's a year, 2 years, 5 years, and then you think, wow, I haven't really been present in what it is that I'm doing, right? And when you fall in that state, you sort of disconnect from all the things that are happening around you, all the opportunities that are there, right? So how I got to CALS, it was a time when I was feeling very jaded in my career, and it happened to come across my feed on LinkedIn, and I know of CALS, being in the space, but it was attractive. The director at the time, Tsepo, lectured me at university when he was starting off in his academic career. That was a plus. Being at the university, knowing that that's a place where I want to be. It's like so many things suddenly made sense that it only made sense for me to apply. And I was fortunate that it came through, and I'm happy there. Honestly, when I when I left that place, right? I mean, that was 15 years ago, right? And I did it on a whim. I just knew that being there then wasn't going to work out. And like you said, there was privilege that I could fall back into, right? I was staying at my parents' house, and I literally sat at home and read books because I didn't know. I was young, I was hopeful, right? Um, but I mean, sitting here now, almost 40, and I have a 3, 4 year old daughter, right? Something that I've learned is pain is coming your way, right? Like your life has hurt in store for you, right? And it's not about shielding her from the hurt. It's about equipping her with the ability to deal with the hurt, right? So if I had to go back and say what is the lesson that I would have learned for myself, it would be how would I better equip the younger version of me to deal with the rejection, right? To deal with times in my career where I labeled it as failure, right? And how do I do that in a healthy way that doesn't slip into depression, right? And um, something that has come up for me in my career is depression. This line of work is depressing. Um, our working environment is depressing, but also the system we work in depresses us, right? There's this constant hand that depresses upon us. So it's how do we be healthy in that space? So if we're talking about how do we equip young lawyers to deal with, not being kept on, it's about equipping them with tools to deal with what those feelings are. In some senses it's planning, sure. Other senses it's how do we deal with our feelings in a healthy way, to make us resilient young lawyers. So recently the SCA handed down a judgment in Atta Africa. Right? It was one of Center for Environmental Rights cases, right? And the people that I work with in the sector are people who solely work in the sector, and at times I describe them as bleeding hearts, right? Which is not necessarily a healthy thing, right? So that case came with a cost order against the Center for Environmental Rights, right? So the SCA said Section 32 of NEMA doesn't protect you. BioWatch doesn't protect you, right? So in a sense, it narrowed the application of, the costs principle. But something important that stood out for me in the SCA's judgment is how we go about balancing developmental interests with socioeconomic rights, right? And one of the critiques academically of socioeconomic rights are how do we achieve them, right? Are they, do they exist outside of budgetary constraints, right? Do they exist outside a government that has the appetite to prioritize those types of rights? So, the way I understood the judgment is while there might be sort of natural and inherent tensions, those tensions are not necessarily mutually destructive, right? So it's not really a binary situation where it's either community interests and rights or it's mining interests. It's more of a balancing of what is the middle ground between the two. And I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but that's the judgment. Yeah, so in many ways, Botswana can't be compared to South Africa. I think we have more people currently in Gauteng than Botswana has over the entire country. It's a tremendously small country, right, in terms of population. So the government will act in a way differently than ours, right? So when you're engaging with government there, it's in a way that we are not familiar with. In Botswana, it's not unusual to meet many people in the day who know the president personally. Just because there's so few people there, to know a minister, and that's how business is done there. If what I understand you to saying is how it differs, I sense a lot more collaboration there. You see, so if the collaboration there is there, then the ability to influence is also there, right? So then it's how do we influence, and if we have legal teams that are public interest minded and social justice minded, you're going to have that influence coming through the powers that be. Saying yes early in my career helped me fall into a lot of things that were good, also things that were bad, cases where I should have said no to, right? But saying no comes with a maturity, right? Or to put it differently, saying yes all the time comes with an immaturity, right? And when I say immaturity, I'm talking about sort of responsibility to yourself and to your time, right? So the more things you say yes to, whatever reserve of time you have is being spent on that, right? So if you look at what it is that we do primarily as lawyers, we give time and attention.
Yeah.
Right. So the more time you have to give to a case, the more attention you can give to it. Right. The more you say yes, the less time you have to give to cases, and the less time you have to give to cases, the less attention you have to give to cases, right? So the turning point for me, it was, am I doing justice to the cases that I am taking on, right? Now, I mean, again, it's an open secret, in practice. You have certain prominent silks who have a reputation of dropping clients just because they take on everything, right? So, I mean, I'm fortunate, again, for my relationship with LHR, because when they found themselves in those situations, I was in my yes phase. So they would come to me with problem cases where they've been dropped, and I would just say, yes, I'll do it. But also at the time, I had time. I had time to give. I had hours at night to give. You know, I was young. I could do all nighters, and I would do all nighters, right? But then you transition into different chapters of your life, and your time affluence changes, right? How much time you have to spend changes, and I think that they should be dictating what you're saying yes and no to, right? So that type of maturity of where am I in life, where's my health, where's my balance, right? And that's what I see young lawyers struggling with. So a friend of mine, he was a year ahead of me at university. He started working at one of the big five law firms, and we would go out in the evenings, and when we were done with dinner, whatever, we would go home, they would go back to the office, and it's like, sure, at the time I understand he was doing that very consciously, but I think the dangerous part, the immaturity, is when you're doing that unconsciously, right? So you're not taking care of yourself, you're not, yeah, you're not spending time with family. That's important for your well-being, right? So it's important, I think, to have the maturity of what does yes mean for me? What are the implications for me, my time, my availability to my life? Hmm. So I think it's natural at a younger age in your career. So I see it with students, I see it with CAs, where we're looking for a template, right? So if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to either be successful, whatever success might look for you, right? But um, I think an important part of learning is failure.
Okay.
And you can only fail if you're putting yourself out there and if you're trying. And I think what makes failure healthy is an awareness,
Okay.
right? So you're not ignorantly failing. You're not failing without any reflection at the end of it, right? Because it's about learning, well, trying, failing, learning, and then trying again, right? So I think as a philosophy, it's important for young lawyers to keep that in mind. You're going to try and you're going to fail, right? And your practice might be a failure, um, but that's not a death sentence, and that's not something that now is reflective of your identity. It's about keep going, right? And I think being in our space, you learn that lesson sort of indirectly through cases. We take on every case hoping to win, but the reality in our system is it's adversarial. There's a winner and there's a loser,
Yeah.
right? And it's not nice when we lose, right? But how do we take it on, reflect on it, and make sure that we don't do that same failure again and again and again, right? So how that looks, it looks like trying. If you're looking for models, there are a number of examples out there. You have um, many organizations in the public interest space, who do things differently from each other, who operate differently. But what we're also seeing now is sort of the privatization of public interest work, right? So you have public interest law firms and consultancies, right, who only take on that type of work. So they have um, the veneer of a private practice law firm, but they're doing the same type of work that you're doing, right? What we're also seeing with the big five firms are, these growing, some call them social impact teams, some just call them pro bono or public interest litigation teams, right? And they do important work. I think what sets them apart is just the model of funding, right? So, excuse me, in the public interest space, we are donor funded, right? When you talking about the privatization of this type of work in the law firms, they they counting it as their pro bono hours. They funded through fees, right? And that's how they're funding it, and they've got the whole firm's resources behind them. Also, there are options out there. You know, you can stay in practice as an attorney, right? You can go into activism, right? So you become an activist lawyer, so not doing practice work anymore. You can go to the bar, right? But yeah, I think it's just finding where that interest is, and seeing where is this road going to take me, and how far it's going to take me, right? And yeah, I think it's a bit outdated to approach any job or any role as I'm taking this on now. I'm mid-20s, mid-30s. I'm going to retire.
Yeah.
I think that is yeah, that's past us. So yeah, focusing on how can we find ourselves in spaces that we can add value to, but also add value to us, right? Where we can grow, where we get the type of mentorship that we need, where we are able to mentor people, because that's also good for our well-being, right, and our growth as practitioners. So yeah, in short, there's no template, there's no answer I can give you other than try, keep trying. I think you know lots of people in the space who will have different takes, and it's about sort of gauging what do I like about what each one is saying, and how can I find my next, whatever that may look like. Yeah, so I mean, a standout case for me is the LRC case, right? The seismic surveys case down on the west coast, right? Search a seismic. We were successful in that case. What's yeah, why it was a highlight for me was um, it was an urgent application, but it was um, a team coming together. We had a big council team. Um, Myself and Nikki led the team until the handover to our senior counsel, right? But we had, at the time, Priyanka was still doing her articles, Vulmin was available, right? Um, and yeah, we were a team of five counsel. So all in all, we had 7 people working collaboratively, right? And I think a mistake many attorneys make is to ship off the work to counsel and have counsel do the work, right? So Searcher is a prime example of the expertise sitting outside of the counsel team, right? Because in that situation, Vilmeen is very much the expert. Expert on the substance, expert on community engagement. She's the person, right? So our kickoff meeting as the council team was how do we identify what it is we need to do and how can we take what Vermeen has and put it in the papers, right? And it's by including her, right? So we had a team of people who are skilled at litigation and people who are skilled at the substance, the work, the strategy, right? And we can advise on that. It was also a good time for me in my life. It was coming out of COVID, so Zoom was becoming a thing, right? Zoom, Teams, and my daughter was just born. So it was, many hours sitting with my newborn, busy typing. Um, yeah, so that was a standout for me. Um, what made that a victory was getting a deep understanding of the community voice. And I think we did a good job at reflecting that in the papers, But I think that's very much dependent on the team. And I think the team was very in tune with what the social issues at play were in that case. There's no template. I don't think there's a formula, right? So maybe let's try answering this from your perspective. Well, not from your perspective, from the perspective of um, what's useful to have at the bar, right? Maturity, right? Because you're now becoming a business person, right? And this is something I was bad at, and I think I still am bad at the business of work. So you need a maturity. So in my pupillage year, we had I think 2 or 3 pupils who came straight from university, and they struggled, right? They struggled with things that I would think council should be um, well developed on, right? So high court process. So not necessarily civil procedure. We learned that, but how do the registrars work? Who do I need to go speak to in the court to get a date? Right? What does a summons look like? Right? Fundamental building blocks that you learn when you're an attorney. You learn when you're a CA, right? And it gets reinstalled when you're an attorney because you're guiding your CAs to learn how the courts work, right? How to conduct a consultation, how to take notes, basic skills, right? You don't learn that at the bar. You do your pupillage. Hopefully, your mentor shows you this and doesn't just expect that you pick it up, through observation. Um, but then there's a maturity that comes with it, right? So you're suddenly in a place where the buck stops with you. You are the sole person responsible, right? In this environment, um, you have your seniors, right? You have the directors who take on that responsibility, right? But you also have fidelity fund certificates, right? You have that indemnification. There's none of that at the bar, right? You're putting yourself out there. So what they'll say is you're holding yourself out to be someone who is capable of representing the public, right? Going to court and pleading a case. If it makes you feel any better, I'm still learning. Every case I take on, it's come back and it's like, okay, I like what I did there. I don't like what I did there. I'm going to become better at it, right? But that comes with the maturity, right? Something that I think gets maybe not spoken about a lot is contacts, right? So if you come to the bar too early, where are you drawing your work from? If you're an unknown, who's going to brief you, right? And there are, yeah, I mean, like we've seen the rise of the celebrity council, right? People, the rising stars, Mail and Guardian, 30 under 30, whatever, right? I mean, that's one out of how many? Johannesburg Bar is huge, closing on to 2,000 advocates. That's a lot of competition, right? So, how do you get yourself in that space feeling like, okay, this is something I can take on, right? Um, I've developed my tools well enough to take on these challenges, right? And how am I mature enough to deal with the failures? And you fail. I don't know how many months I haven't feed. That's a failure of practice, right? That's the failure of the business, right? How do we cope with that? So how do you get there? I don't know, but I think once you feel like you have the maturity, you have the experience, you've been in the sector long enough that you have relationships to build on. Maybe that might be a good time, right? Maybe now might be a good time. I don't know. Mm, just on your last question, right? I think the role of lawyers have changed, right? And um, I think we don't need more traditional lawyers. Um, from my experience in public interest space, and I'm keeping it just to public interest space, right? Um, sort of the value of successes in court has become diluted, right? So, what does it mean to win a case in court, right? And I joke with my students and with my colleagues that it's all for the lawyers. It's for our interest. It's developing the jurisprudence, right? It's having nice judgments to read. But how many cases actually translate into a benefit for your client, a tangible thing? When we're dealing with sort of our fundamental rights cases, our equality cases, and our dignity cases, maybe. When we're dealing with our socioeconomic cases, we're sitting with a case now at CAL's, a community in Soweto got 4 court orders for the municipality to install bulk water and electricity infrastructure, right? The first one was an order compelling. The second one was a contempt order. Then there was another contempt order. It's now been 10 years, right? All the judgments have been for the lawyers, right? So, what does it mean to be a lawyer in 2025? I think sort of the shift of our jurisprudence is happening. We in the early 2000s, we had lots of development on fundamental rights in the jurisprudence at the Constitutional Court, right? A lot of that is settled. So like you had raised Naki with me, right? So Naki started off as a LRC case, right? Cecile was heading that case, right?
Can I just quickly give context for what Naki was? Naki was a case that Cecile and the Makanda team brought, which declared Section 10 of the Birth and Death Registration Act unconstitutional because it didn't allow unmarried fathers to register their children. Cool, go.
Yeah. So, I mean, how that case started was LRC was just attacking the regulations. LHR had approached me and I said, maybe we can attack the provision in the act, right? Anyway, it was an equality case, children's right, dignity case, right? It was an easy win because a lot of the jurisprudence had already been developed, right? So what we're seeing now are cases like Michael Kumape, right? The textbooks cases, right? The schools cases, hospital cases, healthcare, and right? What role does litigation have to play in that if government's coming back and saying there's no budget, or we're rolling over the budget, we haven't gotten budget approval for this session, we have to wait, right? How does the lawyer fit into this process, right? And I think it maybe requires some reimagining of what being a lawyer means, right? Is it just the adversarial, we're going to go to court and we're going to get the order, or is it something more than that, something different? So I think, do we need more lawyers? I think we don't need more traditional lawyers. Is there a need for the type of skills that lawyers have? I think so. I think they can be very valuable in the context of community agency, right? And communities being able to express themselves as entities within South Africa. I think lawyers have a role to play there. Yeah, I mean, my class at Wits, we have 500, just short of 500 in second year. It's split into two classes, 250 a class, right? How many of those want to come into practice? I don't think all of them, but law is a good degree to have, you know. But I think we need to rethink what having that degree means. Does that answer the question? Sort of. Yeah. If you want me to say that we need to put quotas on it, maybe. I mean, they do that with medicine, right? But then we also see what the flip side of that is, right? How many of our doctors are leaving the country, right? So we're putting a limit on how many are coming in, but we losing a lot of them at the tail end, right? So I don't know. That's a very mature way of thinking, right? Um, Students are 17, 18 when they're coming out of school. You know, if I feel if I'm being fair on them, that's um, a big perspective to expect them to hold, right? That's something we develop and we cultivate. And I mean, to be honest with you, when I did my articles, it was just for a check. And I was earning 4,000 Rand a month, right? That was my salary, right? 3,500 Rand a month, right? So it was only when I got admitted and the judge gave the speech of what it actually means to be a lawyer and an officer of the court and what your role is in society, right? Being an agent for administration of justice and access to justice, that I have the wake up that, oh, I actually have something to, I have some role, some purpose, right, in society. It was only until I met my chambermate, Mawande, who taught me about politics of the stomach. Right. So we expect youth to hold this big perspective of, I want to add value everywhere. But also they have politics of the stomach, right? So where am I going to eat? And I mean, there are still firms out there in 2025 paying 3.5, 4,000 Rand a month to CAs. You see, so how do we balance the two? It's like, yes, it's a noble thing. I want to add value, but also, I mean, we need to live, right? We're doing pro bono work. We mustn't ourselves become pro bono cases. And it's a tough one to swallow. So I agree with you that lawyers are largely replaceable, right? But being replaceable doesn't make you not hold value, right? So a lot of what lawyers do are invaluable work, and I mean to get to an esteemed level in your career, I think what improves are your value judgments, right? Your ability to discern softer issues, right? And I mean that there's something that's inherently human, right? And um, I mean I see it in especially community work. So where you have communities as clients, right? When you're consulting with them, what you are doing is a lot of soft skills, a lot of micro things that involve value judgments, right? When you're arguing in court, you're not there preparing a script and going and reading a script. You judging this interaction with the bench, and you're making value judgments along the way. And um, a theme for my life is we wing it, right? We make it up as we go along, but with experience, you become better at making it up, right? So you can make up a better story, right? How do you put a value on that, right? So I think anyone can do it, and the more experience you get, the better you are at making those value judgments. But the fact that it's replaceable doesn't make it not worth anything. So I think there are lines. A lot of what I do is mechanical, right? And a lot of the law firms are simply, incorporating AI to do that, right? Um, so that they can spend most of their time just doing the value judgment work that you don't need a language model to do. No, I don't have any stories. I think it's about keep trying, and knowing that you're not at the end now. You're never going to be at the end. There is no end. It's always a new thing. And every case is always a new case, and it's regardless of whether you like the case or not, right? It's a new case, and how do we be honest to ourselves about how in we are in the work we do. And I think I catch myself often wanting to be somewhere else, and it's like, okay, how do we deal with it? How do we bring ourselves back and give your client what they deserve, right? And they deserve all of you in that moment. So that's helped me. That's helped me a lot. Um, I think in ways it makes me a better lawyer and a more honest lawyer. And yeah. And yeah, just in the theme of grace, right? Be graceful, be gracious, and with the people you work with, and be generous with your knowledge, be greedy to learn. Sure. Sarah, so I was just reminded of a story, and you wanted a story. It's a quick story, right? So yeah, no, and I think it's something that many practitioners come across when they're starting off their career, right? It was the first time that a very prominent silk had brought me onto a case, right? And I was surprised because I was, I was a nobody when I started, right? And I was told to do heads of argument, and there was no guidance, right? And I prepared the heads as best as I could, and I sent it through, and I didn't hear from.
Did you look at Amber's?
There's no heads of argument in AMLAs. Right? And I prepared it, and I think it was a good try, right? And 2 weeks passed, and then I got an email from the attorney saying, thanks for the heads, we filed it. And I opened it, and the silk had done the entire thing, right?
Okay.
It was completely different from mine, right? And that was the last time I ever spoke to the silk about the heads.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, I identified so many moments where I needed to have been taught and been given the feedback in that process to understand what was wrong with what I did, right? And like when I saw them in the passageways, it was, as though we had never worked before. Before, right? It's like a complete stranger, and it's like, okay, how do I navigate this? Because you clearly are not interested in my development, right? And when I talk about how do we become the seniors that we wish we had, it's that, right? Because we've experienced those moments where we were given a massive task and then just written off, right? And that can't be the case if we really care about the people we work with, right? So it's about how do we give feedback, how do we get feedback, and how do we feed that person forward in their career, and yeah, I think that there are so many stories like that at the bar, in attorneys' practices with CAs, and it's about identifying those things and identifying what is it that I'm lacking, and how can I still become that despite what I'm lacking, right? How do I become that for the next generation? Some things are not for you to receive, some things are for you to give.